You're heading to this old cabin just to fulfill a family tradition, until your dog finds something in the woods that it never should have. There was a tradition in your family that had remained unchanged for years. After your grandfather passed away, the cabin was left directly to you. However, in order for the inheritance to officially pass to you, you first had to spend 30 days there. So, at the start of summer, you move into the cabin your grandfather left you. Located hours away from the city, nestled among dense forests, you have a long summer ahead of you, and only 30 days to complete your stay. Duke is there to keep you company during this time. He's an old but still quite strong German Shepherd. For the first few days, everything goes quite smoothly. One evening, while sitting on the porch, you notice that Duke is acting strangely. You've known him for years. He's usually a very calm dog. He wouldn't even bat an eye if he saw a squirrel. He stares at the same spot for a while, growling softly. Then he suddenly dashes into the woods. You call out, "Duke," but he doesn't respond. Sensing something is wrong, you follow him into the woods. After walking a short distance, you see Duke again. He's standing still, waiting. He's holding a black object covered in mud in his mouth. As you approach him, you realize it's an old video camera. He won't let go of it. Meanwhile, his ears are still perked up, and his eyes are constantly scanning the area. You bend down and pull the camera out of Duke's mouth. When you pick it up, you notice the camera is still recording. You involuntarily scan the forest. It feels as if something has just moved among the trees. Duke, however, doesn't take his eyes off the forest for even a moment. So you put the camera in your pocket and start walking back toward the cabin. When you return to the cabin, you set the camera down on the kitchen table. You wipe the mud off it and pick it up. Out of curiosity, you press a few buttons. The screen lights up instantly. The camera is still recording. For a moment, you consider opening the recordings but decide against it. After all, it doesn't belong to you. Just as you're about to turn off the camera, a small preview of the latest recording appears on the screen. The wooden porch in the image catches your attention for a moment. You pick up the camera again and take a closer look. The place you see looks a lot like your own cabin. You can't be sure. Giving in to your curiosity, you insert the memory card into your computer. When you open the first recordings, nothing happens for a long time. The camera seems to have been left in various spots. For minutes on end, there's nothing but trees swaying in the wind, the rustling of leaves, and an empty forest. Just as you're about to shut it down, the footage begins to change. At first, nothing seems out of the ordinary. The camera has captured a few ordinary scenes from the forest. Trees, trails, open clearings. Just as you're about to close the window, a familiar place catches your eye in the next recording. A few seconds later, you realize it's the dirt road leading to your cabin. Then you see your front porch. You pause the video and take a closer look at the screen. Duke is on a leash. A few seconds later, you enter the frame yourself. You're carrying firewood. You rewind the video to check the date. The recording was made a few days after you arrived at the cabin. You open the next recording. Duke enters the frame. The moment he takes the camera into his mouth, a brief shadow appears behind the image, and then the recording cuts off abruptly. You freeze in place for a moment. You try to make sense of what happened. You try to convince yourself that it was a coincidence, but no explanation fully accounts for what you've seen. You set the camera down on the table. You get up and walk over to the window. You part the curtain slightly and look out at the forest. Nothing but trees are visible in the darkness. After waiting a few more seconds, you close the curtain and go upstairs. A little past midnight, you open your eyes at the sound of a faint creak. For a few seconds, you lie still, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the sound was. Just as you're about to drift off to sleep, you hear slow, steady footsteps coming from downstairs. It sounds like someone is actually walking around inside. Duke, who's been sleeping beside you, suddenly lifts his head. He stares at the door for a few seconds. He doesn't bark. He just starts growling quietly. You slowly get out of bed. You crack the door open a few centimeters and peer into the dark hallway. You wait a little longer. When you hear no sound, you take a few steps toward the stair railing. You notice someone is down in the living room. He's wearing a black hoodie and is staring straight up at you without moving a muscle. At that moment, Duke suddenly starts barking. The man moves for the first time. He turns his head toward Duke and then quickly heads toward the stairs. Without a second thought, you step back, rush into the room with Duke, and lock the door. A few seconds later, you hear sounds coming from the stairs. This time they're closer. You stay where you are and listen. The sound stops right in front of the door. As you're wondering what to do, the doorknob slowly moves. First it turns down slightly, then it's released. Duke suddenly jumps to his feet and heads for the door. The door is being forced open again. This time harder. Duke starts barking. Just then, a voice comes from outside. "Give me the camera." You head toward the window at the back of the room. Duke leaps outside before you do. You follow right behind him into the yard. As soon as your feet touch the ground, you start running toward the car. Just as you're about to turn the key, a loud noise comes from inside the cabin. You realize the door can't hold out any longer. The engine starts, and without a moment's hesitation, you pull out onto the dirt road. The next morning, you return to the cabin with the police. The inside looks just as you left it the night before. The door lock has fallen to the floor, and there are signs of forced entry on the door to the upstairs room. But there's no one inside. The camera you left on the table has also vanished. The police search the area for hours but find neither the person nor any other clues. They advise you not to stay here and leave. You actually want to leave too. But if you abandon the cabin, the 30-day period won't be completed, and you'll lose the inheritance rights that have been passed down in your family for years. You know that staying here won't be easy after what happened that night, but you have to decide whether to go back or not. In the end, you decide to stay in the cabin, because leaving before the 30 days are up comes at a price. But you know that from now on, every night you spend in this cabin will be different from before. You've spent every summer at this rental cabin resort since you were a child. This is one of the places where you grew up and know best. This space serves as both your living area and the reception area where guests first arrive. This summer, however, you're in charge of everything for the first time. Your mom and dad have gone to Florida for a week-long vacation they planned months ago. You know you can handle this on your own, but deep down, you're still worried that something might go wrong. After all, even the smallest problem that arises here is now directly your responsibility. Actually, the job is pretty simple. Guests usually don't stay longer than a week. Most of the time, it's pretty quiet. Since school's just out for summer, the busy season hasn't started yet. You handle check-in and check-out for the few guests who come, clean the cabins, and take care of any minor repairs that come up. One of the 4 cabins is located a little farther away from the others. As a child, you never really wanted to go over there alone. There was actually nothing to be afraid of, but for some reason, that cabin always seemed a little more intimidating to you than the others. One of the first reservations you received that season is for the 4th cabin. During check-in, the woman says she wants to get away from the city for a few days to clear her head. You tell her that the fourth cabin is the perfect place for that. It's much quieter than the others. She smiles and says that's exactly the kind of place she was looking for. You hand her the key. She takes her belongings and disappears down the path. Around midnight, you're woken by a series of knocks on the door. When you open the door, the woman staying in cabin number 4 is standing there. The anxiety on her face is obvious at first glance. She says there's a strange feeling in the cabin, but she can't explain it. She hasn't heard any sounds or seen anyone. She pauses for a moment, trying to choose her words. Then, quietly, she says, "I feel like I'm not alone in there." You tell her you can check the cabin together. To be honest, you don't really think anything serious will turn up. You assume she's probably feeling uneasy because of the silence of the forest, which is unfamiliar to her, or the exhaustion from the long journey. Still, it doesn't feel right to send her back alone when she's so unsettled in the middle of the night. You start walking toward the cabin together. Along the way, you talk about this place and the surrounding forest. The woman tells you where she's from, and you talk about what it's like here during the summer. But as you get closer to the cabin, that slight unease inside you starts to resurface. When you arrive at the cabin, you check the inside from top to bottom. You open the cabinets, bend down under the bed, and check the bathroom, the shower stall, and even behind the wardrobe. Everything looks normal. For a moment, you try to figure out why you're so uneasy, but you can't come up with a logical explanation. You tell the woman that it's probably the first night and the silence of the forest that's making her uneasy. She nods, though she doesn't seem entirely convinced. You tell her to come straight to the main cabin if she needs anything, then head back. Just as you're about to return to the main cabin, the bushes to your right rustle for a brief moment. You turn to look out of reflex. There's no wind, but the movement stops. After waiting a few seconds, you assume it was an animal and keep walking. The next day, everything seems normal. You take care of your morning routine. Around noon, you spot the woman staying in the fourth cabin from a distance. She's taking a short walk along the edge of the forest. When she notices you, she waves. You wave back. Since she looks much more relaxed than she did the night before, the slight anxiety you've been feeling begins to fade away. Another day passes without incident. Everything seems to have returned to the routine you're used to. Toward the evening of the second day, as you're sitting in front of the reception desk, your eye catches the trail. From a distance, you see someone running toward you. At first, you think it's one of the guests who goes for an evening run in the woods. A few seconds later, you realize it's the woman staying in cabin number 4. As she gets closer, the panic on her face becomes even more evident. For a moment, you think she's come to say something to you, but without stopping, she runs past you and heads straight for her car. At that moment, you notice she isn't even wearing shoes. She hurriedly opens the car door. She doesn't open the trunk or reach for the back seat. She goes straight to the driver's seat and starts the engine. You follow her to ask what's going on, but she doesn't say a word to you. She steps on the gas pedal and, within a few seconds, drives off the path and disappears from sight. You stand there staring after her for a few seconds. You try to figure out what happened, but nothing makes sense. Then a single possibility occurs to you. You turn around and start walking toward the fourth cabin. When you arrive at the cabin, you see that the door is wide open. As you step inside, shards of broken glass on the floor catch your eye. There's no one in sight. Just as you're about to continue checking the interior, you hear the sound of water flowing continuously from the bathroom. At that moment, the sight before you leaves you frozen in place. A man is sitting in the jacuzzi. Steam from the water lightly fills the bathroom. The man is sitting in the tub with his eyes closed. He looks as relaxed as if he were in his own home rather than someone else's cabin. Even when he notices you, he doesn't budge. His face is dirty. His beard is unkempt, but there's not the slightest trace of surprise on his face. You close the door and head straight outside. You take out your phone, call 911, and describe the man you saw inside. A short while later, the police arrive. While they're waiting outside, the man steps out of the stall. For a moment, he tries to run away, but the officers intervene immediately and apprehend him. He's still wearing nothing but a towel wrapped around his waist. Even when he's caught, he doesn't look surprised or scared. As the police lead him to the car, he turns and looks at you. He smiles slightly. "This place isn't so bad," he says. Then he turns and continues walking. After the incident, the police didn't provide much information about the man. You never heard from him again. But even today, whenever you hand someone the key to the fourth cabin, the first thing that comes to mind is that hot tub. Afterward, the first thing you do is change the locks on all the cabins. Additional security cameras are installed at the entrances, and you now check the cabins much more frequently than before. You rent this Airbnb cabin to get away from the city for a few weeks and clear your head. At first glance, it seems like there's no one else around. But on the third day, a place you stumble upon by chance makes you realize you're not actually alone in this forest. It all begins when you arrive at this secluded Airbnb cabin in the Cascade Mountains for a few weeks at the start of fall. About a year ago, you had gastric bypass surgery. After months of recovery, you decide to treat yourself to a little reward. You rent this isolated Airbnb cabin in the woods, where even your phone barely gets reception and the nearest town is about an hour away, for 2 weeks. It's so chilly in the mornings that you can't step outside without a jacket. As the day goes on, the weather warms up, and the forest becomes just the way you want it for a hike. You spend your first 2 days exploring the nearby trails. On the evening of the third day, as you're heading back to the cabin, a narrow trail stretching through the trees catches your eye. You wonder to yourself, how did I not notice this during the first 2 days? There aren't any signs or directional markers along it. Thinking, I'll just walk a bit and then turn back, you step onto the trail. After walking for about 15 minutes, you come upon a large rock formation. Curious, you get a little closer and see that it's made up of several pieces. Scattered across different parts of the rock formation are many cave entrances, large and small. Some are so narrow you have to crawl in, while others are wide enough to walk through comfortably. When you reach the entrance to the largest cave, you see a sleeping bag caked in mud on the ground. It's hard to tell how long it's been there. A little further on, there's a rusting camp stove and a few overturned cans. Everything looks as if it was left behind in a hurry. As you take a few steps inside, a heavy, pungent odor hits your nose. You look around but can't quite pinpoint where the smell is coming from. Just as you're about to get a little closer to the caves, you reflexively glance at your watch. In that moment, you realize how time has flown. Going into the cave alone at this hour doesn't seem like the smartest idea. As you walk back toward the cabin, your mind is still on the caves. Unwittingly, all sorts of scenarios start playing out in your head. Could it have been an old mine? Could someone still be coming and going there? Or is this one of those strange stories you came across online about people who've lived alone in the caves for years? That evening, as you sit on the porch, your gaze involuntarily drifts toward the direction you'd gone a few hours earlier. For a split second, you see a dark shape among the trees that resembles a human silhouette. When you blink, it vanishes. You stare at the same spot for a long time, but you can't make out anything else. When you wake up the next morning, after what you saw in the woods the night before, you wouldn't normally even consider going back to those caves. But you can't get the old camping gear you saw in front of them yesterday out of your mind. Putting the two together, your curiosity gets the better of you. I'll go take another look. You say to yourself, grab your backpack, and start walking down the same trail. When you reach the caves, the sleeping bag and camp stove lying on the ground are gone. You see only fresh boot prints on the ground. What's more, they don't belong to just one person. Several different sets of tracks are intertwined in front of the caves. You're certain that when you arrived yesterday, there were only your own footprints here. It's very clear that someone else has been here besides you overnight. A voice inside you tells you not to stay here any longer. Just as you're about to turn back, you hear the sound of footsteps behind you. As the footsteps draw closer, the caves behind you are your only refuge. You move a little past the entrance and hide behind a rock. You try to stay as still as possible to avoid making any noise. You look around a little more carefully. There are empty water jugs at the base of the wall. A worn-out tarp is spread out on the ground. A few logs are piled up in one corner. This place doesn't seem to have been abandoned for as long as you first thought. The footsteps are getting closer and closer. A few seconds later, you realize they're coming from right outside the cave's entrance. You don't move a muscle. You can't see them, but the shadows falling through the cave's entrance are enough to tell you they're moving. Then two different voices come from outside. At first, you can't make out what they're saying. The voices echo inside the cave. A few seconds later, one of them becomes clearer. He might have made it this far. There's a brief silence. The other one replies in a lower voice. Make sure he doesn't leave any traces. Then silence again. You hear someone taking a few steps. It sounds as if they're walking over stones. As the sound approaches the cave's entrance, you instinctively pull back a little further. Your back presses firmly against the hard rock wall. You don't even dare to shift your weight because you can feel the loose stones beneath your feet. Your legs start to tremble from staying in the same position, but you don't move. You know that even the slightest sound you make at that moment could be enough to draw them into the cave. The voices start up again, but this time the words are jumbled. You can't make out what they're saying. About 10 seconds later, the footsteps start moving again. This time, they begin to slowly drift away. Still, you don't leave right away. You wait where you are for a while. Once the sounds have completely faded, you carefully walk toward the cave's entrance and peek outside. This time, you walk the path you came without stopping even once. A few times you think about looking back, but you decide against it. All you want is to reach the cabin as soon as possible. When you reach the cabin, everything seems normal at first. As you take out your key and head toward the door, your eye catches the mud on the ground. There are two different sets of boot prints leading all the way to the porch. The tracks end in front of the door, then continue back into the forest. You wait where you are for a few seconds. You glance around. You don't want to stay out in the open any longer. You open the door and rush inside. You take a quick look around the cabin. Thankfully, no one's inside, but for some reason, you can hardly sleep that night. Whenever your eyes start to close, even the slightest sound from outside is enough to wake you up again. With the first light of dawn, you pack your things and hit the road. As the forest road recedes behind you, you try not to look in the rearview mirror. All you want is to get as far away from that area as possible. Have you ever had a strange experience like this when you were all alone? Share your stories in the comments. Let's chat a bit.